The first thing my daughter did when she walked through my front door that Thanksgiving was hug me longer than usual. Not the quick squeeze she'd given me for the last few years, the kind where you can feel someone already pulling back before they've even fully arrived. This was a real hug. Both arms, face turned into my shoulder, held for a beat longer than necessary. I noticed it because it wasn't normal. And I noticed it because standing behind her in my doorway, smiling the easy smile of a man who had been in my daughter's life for 7 months and in my house exactly twice, was her boyfriend, a man named Fletcher Doan. My name is Ray Covington. I'm 58 years old. I spent 19 years as a licensed clinical social worker before moving into forensic consulting, which is a quieter way of saying that for the last 14 years, I have worked with prosecutors and defense attorneys and family court judges, helping them understand why people behave the way they do. I have evaluated con artists. I have sat across tables from people who had dismantled other people's lives with nothing but patience and charm. I have written reports about individuals who had never in their lives made a decision that wasn't calculated to serve themselves, who had learned to perform warmth so well they had forgotten it was a performance. I was thinking about none of this when my daughter hugged me too long on my front porch in November. I was just thinking about the hug. My wife, Elaine, was in the kitchen. She came out wiping her hands on a dish towel and laughed when she saw them, telling my daughter her hair looked beautiful and asking Fletcher something about the drive from Columbus. He answered easily, naturally, the way people answer questions when they're comfortable or when they've practiced being comfortable. My daughter stood slightly behind him and to the left, which was a small thing and maybe nothing, except that my daughter doesn't stand behind people. She stands next to them. She always has. We sat down to dinner. My son, who lives 20 minutes away, came with his wife and their 2 kids, and the table was full and loud the way it gets when the grandchildren are there. Fletcher was good with the kids. Not performed good, not the self-conscious good of someone trying to make an impression, but naturally easy with them, crouching down to their level, listening to what they said. I watched him do it and thought, this man is either genuinely kind or he is very far along in what he does. I didn't know which one yet. My daughter's name is Iris. She's 29 years old. She has been careful with people her whole life, not cold, but careful. The way you get when you've watched someone you love get hurt and filed it away as a lesson. She'd had 2 serious relationships before Fletcher, both of which she'd ended herself, quietly and without drama, because she'd seen something she didn't like and trusted what she saw. She was not a person who missed things, which is why I was paying attention to the way she was sitting. After dinner, after the kids went to watch something in the back room and my son and his wife were helping Elaine with the dishes, Iris came and sat next to me at the dining room table with her wine glass. Fletcher had gone to use the restroom. She looked at me for a moment, and then she did something I hadn't seen her do since she was maybe 12 years old. She reached under the table and pressed 2 fingers to the back of my hand. Once, then again. Then she pulled her hand back and looked at her wine glass like nothing had happened. I knew exactly what it meant. We had made it up when she was 9. There was a woman in our neighborhood whose name I won't mention, who had a particular habit of cornering my daughter at block parties and church events and talking at her about things a 9-year-old had no interest in, topics like property tax assessments and the correct way to prune azaleas. And Iris had no mechanism for escaping politely, so we invented one. 2 taps. Under a table, on an arm, wherever she could reach. It meant, I need you to come get me. Don't make it obvious. She hadn't used it in 17 years. I kept my face completely still. I put my hand over hers for 1 second, just one, which was the signal back. I heard you. I'm here. Fletcher came back from the restroom. He sat down across from us and asked me something about a college football game, and I answered him and watched his eyes, and he was pleasant and interested, and absolutely nothing on the surface gave anything away. I waited until after they left. Elaine stood at the kitchen window for a moment after the headlights had cleared the driveway. She said, without turning around, you noticed it too. I said I noticed several things. She turned around. The taps under the table, she said. I hadn't told her about our signal. I hadn't told anyone. But Elaine had known Iris for 29 years and had known me for 31, and she sees things. I need to call her tomorrow, I said. Elaine nodded and dried her hands. Do what you need to do. I'll stay out of your way until you know what you're dealing with. That was the thing about a long marriage. She didn't need me to explain what I was and wasn't worried about. She could read the weight of it from across the kitchen. I called Iris the next morning at 9. She picked up on the second ring. I asked her if she was alone. She said Fletcher had gone to the gym. Her voice was even, but I could hear the careful in it. The way people sound when they've been holding something for a while and are not quite sure it's safe to put it down. I told her I'd noticed the signal. I asked her if she wanted to talk. There was a pause long enough that I started to say her name. Then she said, "I don't know where to start." I told her to start anywhere. What came out over the next 40 minutes was not a single dramatic thing. It was a series of small things. And that was exactly the problem, because each one on its own was nothing. But together, they had a shape that I recognized. It had started about 4 months in. Small comments about her friends, delivered gently. The way you deliver things you're framing as concern. Her friend Pam was a lot, wasn't she? Kind of exhausting? Her college friend Brittany seemed like the type who brought unnecessary drama. He hadn't told her not to see them. He had just made it gradually unpleasant to talk about them, so she'd stopped bringing them up, and then she'd started seeing them less, and she hadn't connected those two things until she was already on the other side of it. He'd started a few months ago suggesting she think about consolidating her finances. Not aggressively. He'd framed it as being smart, as being intentional, as the kind of thing couples who were serious about a future did together. He had a financial advisor he trusted. His name came up more than once. He said Iris was leaving money on the table in her current accounts, that with the right structure, she could be building real equity instead of just sitting still. She had a 401k from her job and a savings account her grandmother had left her. Together, she told me, they were just over $90,000. I kept my voice completely level. "How far along has it gotten?" I asked. He'd sent her something to look at. A document. She hadn't signed anything. But he'd mentioned twice that there was a window for getting in before the first of the year because of how the fund was structured. A window that closed, I said. She was quiet. "That's the first thing," I said. "Real investment vehicles don't have artificial intake windows. The closing deadline is a pressure tool. It's designed to stop you from doing the thing you should always do, which is slow down and verify independently." She said quietly that she knew something felt off, but he was so steady about it. He never pressured her outright. He was never unkind. He just kept coming back to it calmly, over and over, always framed as something he wanted for her, for them. And she'd started to feel like maybe she was the problem, like her hesitation was a failure of trust. "That's not an accident," I said. "That's the mechanism. You make someone feel like their own doubt is the obstacle, and then their doubt starts working for you instead of for them." She didn't say anything for a moment. Then she said, "Is he actually a bad person, or am I overreacting?" I told her I didn't know yet. I told her what I did know was that the pattern she'd described had a name, and the name of it was not good, and I wanted to look at the document before we talked about anything else. "Can you forward it to me tonight?" She did. I spent 3 hours at my desk that evening. The document was for something called the Meridian Horizon Growth Fund, formatted cleanly on letterhead with a Denver address and a logo that looked professional at a glance. It described a strategy involving diversified private equity positions and real asset holdings. It had a performance table showing 8 years of returns, averaging between 16 and 21% annually. There was a section on investor protections that referenced something called the Meridian Capital Assurance Reserve, described in more detail in a separate disclosure document that was not attached. The Denver address was a registered agent service, $45 a month, a suite number, a forwarding address. There was no FINRA registration, no SEC filing. I spent 20 minutes on the Investment Advisor public disclosure database and found nothing. I checked the Colorado Division of Securities, nothing. I checked the name Fletcher Doan against publicly available state licensing records. He was not a licensed investment advisor in Ohio. He was not registered as a broker. He had a LinkedIn profile describing him as an independent wealth strategist, a title that means exactly nothing in terms of legal standing or regulatory oversight. I slept 4 hours. In the morning, I called a woman named Gail Hester. Gail and I had crossed paths 15 years ago on a case involving financial elder abuse, a case that had eventually resulted in a conviction, and we'd kept a professional relationship since. She worked white-collar fraud for the FBI field office, and she was, without question, one of the sharpest people I'd encountered in any room in 30 years of working adjacent to law enforcement. She picked up on the third ring and said she had 10 minutes. I gave her the name Fletcher Doan, the fund name, the Denver address, and the name of the financial advisor he'd referenced to Iris. She said, "Give me until this afternoon." I also called a friend named Patrick Sue, who had been a forensic accountant for a decade before opening a private practice. I read him 3 sections of the document over the phone. He stopped me twice. When I finished the section on real asset holdings, he said, "Ray, there is no actual description of what those assets are. None. There's no schedule, no collateral list, nothing. A real private equity fund with physical asset backing would identify those assets specifically. This is language that is designed to sound like it means something while committing to nothing." He paused. If someone wired money to this fund and the managers later claimed the assets had declined in value or a credit facility had defaulted, there would be no way for an investor to verify what had ever actually existed. You couldn't fight it because there would be nothing to point to. Gail called me back at 2:15. Her voice had the particular quality I'd learned to recognize over years. Even measured, the voice people use when they found something and are deciding how to frame it. "He's real," she said. Fletcher Doan, 36 years old, grew up in Youngstown, studied finance at a school in Indiana, worked 2 years at a legitimate brokerage in Pittsburgh before he was terminated. The firm filed a regulatory complaint. The complaint is closed, but it's in the record. The basis was undisclosed outside investment activity and an inappropriate financial relationship with a client. Who was the client? A woman, 54 years old, recently divorced. She transferred $65,000 into a private fund at his recommendation. The fund had no registration. The woman did not pursue it through criminal channels. She said later she was embarrassed and wanted it behind her. I closed my eyes for a moment. There it was, the first version. Smaller, rougher, a rehearsal. Is Meridian Horizon registered anywhere? No, there is no registered fund by that name in any state. So what we have is a pattern, I said. What you have, Gail said, is a pattern and a prior complaint and an unregistered investment vehicle and a current target who hasn't transferred any money yet. She paused. How close is he to the ask? The document's already in her hands. There's a year-end deadline he's mentioned twice. How much is at risk? $90,000. Her 401k and her grandmother's money. There was a brief pause on Gail's end. I'd been doing this long enough to know that she was not unmoved. We had both worked cases where the grandmother's money was a detail at the end of a police report, not something that could still be kept safe. "Okay," she said. "Here's what I need. I need your daughter to agree to one more conversation with him where he makes the pitch directly and clearly. In Ohio, one-party consent means she can record a conversation she's part of without disclosing it. If she lets him walk her through the fund, ask her to commit funds, name the transfer method, and records it herself on her own phone, that recording is usable. She's going to have questions about that. I know. But Ray, she reached out to you. She already knows something is wrong. She's been waiting for you to tell her how to move." I drove to Columbus that evening. Iris met me at the door of her apartment in a sweatshirt, and I could see from the way she held herself that she'd been anxious all day. We sat on her couch and I told her everything. The Denver address that was a mail forwarding service, the missing FINRA registration, Patrick's analysis of the document, the Pittsburgh complaint, the woman who had lost $65,000 and was too embarrassed to press charges. Iris sat with her legs pulled up and listened without speaking. When I finished, she said, "He told me last month he was falling in love with me." Not angry, not even sad exactly. The voice of someone sitting with the full architectural weight of something they had believed. "I know," I said. "I didn't try to fix it." She looked at the window. "How do people do that? Just decide to do that to someone?" "I've spent a long time thinking about that question professionally," I said. "The honest answer is that the people who are most effective at this have usually spent enough time doing it that it stopped feeling like a decision. It just became what they do. The feelings they generate in other people are real. The connection you felt was real. That's what makes it work." She was quiet for a while. Then she said, "So what do I need to do?" I walked her through the recording. She would need to call him, tell him she'd been thinking about the fund, that she had a few remaining questions before she was ready to commit. Let him come to her. Let him make the full pitch. Let him name the transfer amount, the account details, the timeline. Don't push him. Don't be nervous. Be someone who is almost at yes. She looked at me. Her eyes were steady, the same eyes she'd had since she was a small kid, the kind that didn't move away from hard things. I've spent 4 months feeling like my own instincts were the problem, she said. I think I can sit across from him for 90 minutes. She called him that night. She said she'd been giving the fund serious thought and wanted to talk it through properly before the year-end window. He was warm and unhurried on the phone. Glad she'd reached out. Happy to talk through any questions she had. They made plans for that Saturday afternoon at her apartment, which was her suggestion, and he agreed without hesitation. Saturday morning, I drove back to Columbus. We sat at her kitchen table, and I walked her through it the way I had walked people through difficult interviews for 20 years. Phone in her shirt pocket, screen down, voice memo running. Let the silence work. If he paused, don't fill it. People fill silence. Ask neutral, clarifying questions. Be warm, be present, be someone who has made her decision and just needs to hear it one more time out loud. She nodded through all of it. I drove home and sat with Elaine in the living room and didn't talk much. She made coffee and we both held our cups and listened to the house. Iris texted me at 4:42. I have everything. Give me 20 minutes. When she calls, her voice was steady but thin in the way voices get when the body has been running on adrenaline and is only starting to come down. She told me he had been clear and thorough. He'd described the fund structure and the projected returns, consistent with what the document said, 16 to 21% annually. He'd explained that the year-end window was a hard date, tied to how the fund opened new positions. He'd named the commitment amount. He thought she should start with $50,000 and hold the rest liquid for now, though if she wanted to position for the preferred tier, she'd need to come in at $75,000. He had walked her through the wire transfer process and given her the routing information for an account at a credit union in Nevada. He had told her that the fund managers worked outside the large institutional banks because of processing speed and flexibility, and that once her transfer was confirmed, her money would be working within 48 hours. 48 hours. I knew what 48 hours meant. By the time anyone identified the fund as fraudulent and attempted a recovery, 48 hours was enough time to route money through enough intermediary accounts that clawing it back became extremely difficult. 48 hours was not a feature. It was the exit window. I called Gail that night. She listened to my summary and said she wanted the audio file sent to her securely, which Iris did within the hour. She called me the following morning at 7:50. It's enough, she said. We're moving this week. I didn't ask for the details of what followed. That wasn't my role, and it wasn't Iris's. What I can tell you is that Fletcher Doan was taken into custody at his apartment in Columbus on a Wednesday morning. I know because Iris called me while she was standing in the parking lot of her building, having been asked to wait outside, and she said very quietly, "They're in there, Dad." They went in. "Go walk around the block," I said. "Don't stand still." She said, "Okay." The investigation that followed revealed that Fletcher had run versions of the same scheme in 2 other states before Ohio. The Meridian Horizon Growth Fund was one of 2 fraudulent vehicles connected to him. Across all victims investigators could establish, 7 people, the documented losses exceeded $800,000. Several of those people had already transferred money before Fletcher met Iris. She was the first one who hadn't lost a dollar. She came for Christmas that year, just the 4 of us, her and my son and Elaine and me. It was quieter than Thanksgiving, deliberately so. Elaine made the lamb she only makes twice a year. We opened presents and watched something on television, and the kids video called from my son's-in-law's house to show us a toy, and it was an ordinary Christmas in every way that mattered. After dinner, Iris and I sat at the kitchen table while Elaine and my son watched television in the other room. She had her hands around a mug of tea, and she was looking at the window the way people look at things they're not really seeing. She said, "I keep going back to the moment I realized I'd stopped trusting my own read on things. That's the part that stays with me, not him." "That," I said. "I know." She said, "When did that happen?" I'm usually so careful. I looked at my daughter. I thought about the work I had done for 20 years. The depositions and the evaluations and the reports filed in cases where people who were careful had still lost things they couldn't get back. I thought about the particular skill required to make a careful person stop trusting their own perception. It is not a small skill. It is a practiced and deliberate one. Iris, I said, what happened to you doesn't happen because you stopped being careful. It happens because someone spent significant time and intention making the environment around you feel safe while quietly rearranging the furniture. The isolation from your friends wasn't obvious because it was never issued as an instruction. It was installed gradually, comment by comment, until the distance felt like something you'd chosen. That's not a failure of your judgment. That's someone working very hard against your judgment from the inside. She was quiet. The part I want you to hold on to, I said, is this. At some point, before your conscious mind was ready to name what was wrong, some part of you knew. And instead of talking yourself out of it, you reached across a dinner table and pressed 2 fingers to my hand. She smiled at that. Small and real. Most people don't, I said. That's the hardest thing about these cases. People feel the wrongness early and convince themselves they're being unfair. They don't want to seem paranoid. They don't want the relationship to be what it's starting to look like. So they wait, and while they're waiting, the window closes. She said, I almost talked myself out of it. I almost left that table without doing it. I know, but you didn't. We sat there for a while with the sound of the television from the other room and the particular quiet of a house in December. She asked me if she thought he would go to prison. I said that wasn't for me to decide, but that the recording was clear and the prior complaint was on record and there were 7 other people who now had a path to accountability, in part because she hadn't let him finish what he'd started. She nodded. Then she said, I'm glad I didn't override myself. So am I said. We joined the others in the living room. Elaine had fallen asleep in the corner of the couch with a blanket over her, the way she does. And my son was watching a bowl game he had no particular stake in. And Iris tucked her feet up next to me, and we stayed there until it was late and comfortable, and nothing needed to be said. There are things I want to say plainly. As someone who has spent most of his adult life studying how people are manipulated, financial fraud targeting individuals in relationships is not declining. It is increasing in sophistication. The people who run these schemes are not looking for victims who are foolish. They are looking for people who are open, who trust, who are capable of emotional investment, because emotional investment is the mechanism through which financial decisions get made. By the time a real ask comes, the groundwork has been laid for months. The hesitation you feel doesn't register as instinct. It registers as doubt about yourself. That is by design. The warning signs are not always dramatic. An investment return consistently above 8 or 9% annually should cause you to pause. Any fund or financial vehicle that cannot be independently verified through the SEC's Investment Advisor Public Disclosure Database or your state's securities regulator deserves much closer scrutiny before you commit anything. A business address that resolves to a registered agent service rather than an actual office is a red flag. Urgency around a deadline that you didn't know existed before this conversation is a pressure tool, not a real constraint. Anyone who frames your desire to consult an independent financial advisor or attorney as distrust or as an obstacle to an opportunity is not acting in your interest. You can search any investment advisor's registration status at advisorinfo.sec.gov. It is free and it takes 4 minutes, and those 4 minutes have the potential to protect everything you have spent a lifetime building. And this, if someone in your life reaches out to you in whatever form they can manage, with whatever signal they have available, listen to it. My daughter used a code we invented for a 9-year-old's problem because some part of her, before her conscious mind had language for it, knew she needed someone outside the situation to look at what was happening. That instinct is not nothing. It is the most important information available. Honor it in the people who matter to you and trust it in yourself. We didn't lose anything. And the reason we didn't lose anything, in the end, was a 29-year-old woman sitting at a Thanksgiving table and pressing 2 fingers against her father's hand. If something doesn't feel right, that feeling is data. It has always been data. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. I've spent a long time thinking about what actually protected Iris. Not the recording, not my calls to Gail and Patrick, not even the investigation that followed. All of that came after. What protected her was a decision she made before any of it. The decision not to override herself. That's the thing I keep coming back to. She told me she almost didn't do it. She almost sat through that Thanksgiving dinner and left without pressing those 2 fingers to my hand. Because the voice that says, you're being unfair, you're being paranoid, you don't want to wreck something good. That voice was loud. Fletcher had spent 7 months making it loud. That's not an accident. That is the work. The isolation from her friends, the gentle reframing of her own doubt as a failure of trust. None of that happened overnight. It was installed carefully, piece by piece, in a way that was designed to make her judgment feel like the obstacle rather than the instrument. And here's what I know about that. Professionally and personally, the people who lose everything to these schemes are not, as a rule, less intelligent or less careful than the people who don't. They are often more trusting, more emotionally open, more willing to extend the benefit of the doubt. Those are not weaknesses. Those are qualities that someone decided to treat as vulnerabilities. The difference between Iris and the 7 people who had already lost money to Fletcher wasn't that she was smarter or more suspicious. It was that when the wrongness arrived, quiet and formless and easy to explain away, she didn't talk herself out of it completely. She reached across the table. That takes a particular kind of courage that doesn't look like courage from the outside. It looks like a small gesture. 2 fingers. A second and a half. But what it actually was a person choosing to trust her own perception over the very comfortable alternative of pretending everything was fine. That is harder than it sounds. It requires a kind of honesty with yourself that most people spend significant energy avoiding. Because what you're admitting when you send that signal is that something you wanted to be real might not be. I think about the woman in Pittsburgh who lost $65,000 and was too embarrassed to say anything. I don't judge her. I have sat across from enough people in enough rooms to know that embarrassment is one of the most powerful forces there is. It can convince you to absorb a loss rather than name it, because naming it means admitting that you believed something, and believing the wrong thing feels in the moment like a reflection of who you are. It isn't. It is a reflection of what someone did to you. The actions we take and the actions we don't take compound. Fletcher's choices compounded too. The Pittsburgh complaint sitting in a record, the prior victim who couldn't recover her money, the pattern that eventually became the evidence that put him in custody. Every decision he made in the direction of taking from people built the structure that ultimately came down on him. That is not mysticism. That is just how consequential behavior works over time. What I want Iris to carry forward, what I want anyone who hears this to carry forward, is the understanding that your instincts are not noise, they are information. They are often the first and most accurate information you receive, arriving before your conscious mind has assembled the evidence into language. The discipline is not in overriding them. The discipline is in honoring them even when doing so is uncomfortable, even when it means looking at something you'd rather not see. Iris did that, and everything else that followed, the recording, the arrest, the 8 people who now have a path to some form of accountability, was only possible because a 29-year-old woman decided, in one quiet moment at a dinner table, that her own perception was worth trusting. That is not a small thing. That is, in fact, everything.